They drilled 3,280 feet into Chinese soil and exposed a collapse Xi Jinping can't cover up. It wasn't oil, it wasn't gold, it was proof that China is dying of thirst. Beneath the factories, the farms, the megacities lies devastation. Aquifers emptied, groundwater poisoned, land sinking, cities cracking. This isn't speculation, it's science. Xi's own hydrologists now admit Beijing's water table has fallen by hundreds of feet. Entire regions are collapsing into hollow ground, and no amount of propaganda can refill what's been drained. For decades, the Chinese Communist Party built an empire on borrowed water. Now, the debt is coming due. This drill didn't just expose the earth, it pierced the illusion and hit the truth. And that truth? China's greatest threat isn't foreign invasion, it's what's missing under its own feet. Let's dig into what Beijing doesn't want you to see and what's already too late to stop. Picture this: 28,000 rivers, gone, vanished in just 25 years, erased from the map. Rivers that sustained Chinese civilization for millennia simply ceased to exist. In some villages, elderly residents tell stories of rivers where they swam as children, where they caught fish, where communities gathered. Their grandchildren have never seen water flow there, not once. The riverbed is just cracked dirt now, a gray scar cutting through the landscape. The Yellow River, the mother river of Chinese civilization, where the first dynasties emerged 5,000 years ago, now flows at barely 10% of what it carried in the 1940s. Entire stretches run completely dry for months at a time. Where fishing boats once crowded the waters, where trade barges carried goods between cities, there's nothing but cracked earth stretching into the horizon. Riverbeds that carried the lifeblood of dynasties now look like lunar landscapes, gray, lifeless, dead. And here's what's happening right now in cities across northern China. Hotels ration water to 1 hour per day. 1 hour to shower, wash your hands, brush your teeth, live. Not in some remote rural village, in major cities across the nation that calls itself a superpower. Business travelers check into hotels and find notices posted, water available 7 to 8 a.m. only. After that, taps run dry until the next morning. This is the reality in a country that built entire megacities from nothing in under a decade. Beijing, the gleaming capital, seat of communist power, has water availability of just 250 cubic meters per person annually. That's half the threshold the UN defines as extreme scarcity. The kind of number you'd expect from desert nations in the Middle East, not from the capital of the world's second largest economy. It's less water per person than many residents of Saudi Arabia have access to. Let that sink in. Let that sink in for a moment. But it's not just Beijing. 12 provinces covering 41% of China's population now face severe water shortages. These aren't empty wastelands on the edges of the empire. These regions produce 38% of China's agricultural output, 46% of industrial production, half the nation's electricity generation. The engine of Chinese power, the factories, the farms, the infrastructure that built China's rise is running on vapors. So here's the question everyone should be asking. How are millions of faucets still running? How do factories operate? How does life continue? The answer lies underground, and it's terrifying. When the rivers began dying, China turned desperate. They drilled, and when shallow wells ran dry, they drilled deeper still. Wells that once tapped water at 30 meters, about the height of a 10-story building, now plunge hundreds of meters down. Some go over a kilometer deep, drilling through solid bedrock to reach ancient aquifers formed during the Ice Age. Fossil water that accumulated drop by drop over tens of thousands of years while mammoths still walked the earth and humans lived in caves. Water that was never supposed to be touched. Emergency reserves that should have been saved for the direst scenarios imaginable. China has been draining it for decades, treating ancient geological wealth like an infinite resource. Beijing's own government admits 2/3 of its provinces are over-extracting groundwater. When you hear that phrase, over-extracting, what it really means is this: pumping water out faster than rainfall and rivers can possibly refill it. Mining water like it's coal, treating a renewable resource as if it's disposable. And when a regime that habitually covers up disasters and censors bad news publicly confesses to a crisis of this magnitude, you know the situation has already spiraled far beyond control. Some regions are tapping what officials call deep groundwater, reserves so far down that accessing them was never part of any sane water management plan. These are supposed to be emergency supplies, last resort reserves for civilization-ending scenarios. China touched them in the 1980s and never stopped. Now those reserves are running dry too. The numbers are almost incomprehensible. 60 billion cubic meters of groundwater vanish every single year. To put that in perspective, that's enough water to fill Lake Erie. Every year, gone, pumped out and consumed, and leaving hollow spaces in the earth where life-sustaining water once sat. This isn't sustainable water use. This isn't even unsustainable water use. This is water theft on a geological scale, systematically robbing the future to pay for the present. A 2025 study analyzing Chinese cities revealed that 180 of them face critical groundwater depletion or contamination crises, affecting over 311 million urban residents. That's close to the entire population of the United States living above aquifers that are collapsing or poisoned, or both. In parts of the North China Plain, China's agricultural heartland, water tables drop 1 to 3 meters every single year. Wells drilled last year don't reach water this year. Farmers watch their irrigation systems sputter and fail. Ancient lakes shrink to toxic puddles ringed with dead fish. Wetlands that sustain migratory birds for millennia turn to cracked mud and dust. But you haven't heard the worst part yet. When you pump water out of the ground, you're not just removing liquid. You're removing the physical support structure holding up everything above it. The soil particles that were suspended in water, held apart by that moisture, start compacting. The ground settles, compresses, sinks, and China is sinking fast. A 2024 satellite study using advanced radar monitoring over 7 years revealed something that should be headline news everywhere. 45% of China's major urban areas are subsiding faster than 3 millimeters per year. 16% are dropping more than 10 millimeters annually. That means 270 million people, more than a quarter of China's urban population, are literally living on land that's falling beneath their feet as you watch this. Beijing's Shaoyang district, packed with gleaming skyscrapers, underground subway networks, vital infrastructure, drops 45 millimeters per year near major transit lines. That's nearly 2 inches of vertical ground loss every 12 months. Roads crack and buckle under the strain of shifting earth. Building foundations settle unevenly, creating structural problems that compound with each passing year. High-speed rail lines warp slightly out of alignment, requiring constant monitoring, adjustment, and expensive repairs. In some districts of Beijing, the ground has fallen 11 centimeters in a single year, more than 4 inches of vertical drop that's enough to cause visible, measurable damage to buildings and critical infrastructure. Imagine your entire city sinking 4 inches while you live there. Most residents don't even realize it's happening until the cracks appear. Shanghai, the crown jewel of Chinese economic power, the city that symbolizes China's rise on the global stage, has subsided over 3 meters since industrialization began a century ago. 3 meters, 10 feet of vertical drop. The city that's supposed to represent China's future is literally collapsing into the earth beneath its own weight, inch by inch, year by year. And it's not just Shanghai. Tianjin, Guangzhou, Ningpu, Fuzhou, all major coastline megacities housing millions, are experiencing the same fate. By 2120, researchers project that 22 to 26% of China's coastal lands will sit below sea level, not from climate change and rising oceans alone, though that's certainly accelerating the crisis, but from the ground itself sinking like the hull of a torpedoed ship slowly going under. Between 55 and 128 million people could end up living in what becomes permanent flood zones. Think about that number. That's more than the population of most countries on Earth, trapped in cities that sit below sea level, vulnerable to every storm surge, every typhoon, every spring tide. Cities that took decades to build, trillions of yuan to develop, could become effectively unlivable in less than a century. Across the countryside, dramatic sinkholes are swallowing fields, roads, houses, and entire buildings without warning. These aren't natural karst formations. They're man-made disasters triggered by groundwater extraction undermining the Earth's structure. The ground becomes hollow like a dried sponge, and then one day, without any warning, it simply collapses. A farmer walks across his field in the morning and the ground opens up beneath him, revealing a cavern that hadn't been there the day before. A section of highway drops 6 feet overnight, stranding vehicles. Buildings tilt and crack as the soil beneath their foundations gives way. Over 60,000 square kilometers of Chinese land, an area larger than the entire nation of Taiwan, has experienced measurable subsidence. The damage already cost China an estimated 7.5 billion won annually in infrastructure repairs, compensation, and emergency responses. And that's just what Beijing admits to. The real number is certainly higher. But here's the part Xi Jinping absolutely cannot hide, no matter how much the party tries to censor it. When those engineers drilled 3,280 feet down into Chinese soil, they didn't just find emptiness. They found poison. 80% of China's groundwater wells show contamination when tested. The Lowy Institute, analyzing data from multiple sources, estimates that 80 to 90% of China's groundwater is now unsuitable for drinking without extensive treatment. But it gets worse. 50% of China's groundwater is so toxic that you cannot even use it to irrigate crops. Read that again. Half of the groundwater beneath the world's most populous nation is so contaminated that plants watered with it would absorb toxins. Official government surveys, the ones Beijing cannot suppress without completely destroying any remaining credibility, confirm the nightmare. China's Ministry of Environmental Protection found that 60% of monitored groundwater in cities was classified as seriously contaminated, unfit for human consumption, dangerous even with treatment. Only a tiny fraction of tested wells returned results that qualified as genuinely clean. The Pearl River Delta, one of China's most economically vital regions, provides a case study in catastrophe. Scientists drilled deep and extracted groundwater samples for laboratory analysis. What they found should shock anyone paying attention. Arsenic concentrations reaching 161 micrograms per liter. The World Health Organization's safety guideline is 10 micrograms per liter. This water was 16 times over the safe threshold. Drinking water contaminated above 50 micrograms per liter can cause cognitive development damage in children. At 161 micrograms, it's not just unsafe, it's slow-motion poisoning spreading through an entire economic region that houses tens of millions of people. Professor John A. Cherry, one of Canada's leading hydrogeologists who spent years studying China's groundwater crisis firsthand, delivered a chilling assessment in 2016. Up to 80% of water sources in some rural areas may be genuinely unsafe. Farmers across these regions know their irrigation water is contaminated. They can see it, smell it sometimes, watch what happens to their skin when they work in the fields all day. But they have no choice. They use it anyway because there's no alternative. Growing vegetables and rice they themselves refuse to eat. The produce goes to local markets, enters the food supply chain, gets transported to cities, and some of it gets exported internationally. The toxins keep spreading through the system. How did this happen? How does the world's most tightly controlled society allow its most fundamental resource to become poisoned on this scale? One word: corruption. For decades, really since Deng Xiaoping's economic reforms began in the 1980s, local governments prioritized economic growth above everything else. GDP numbers determined whether officials got promoted to Beijing or sidelined to irrelevance. Factories brought jobs, tax revenue, and proof of progress that Communist Party bosses demanded to see on paper. So factories dumped industrial waste into rivers at night when no one was watching. Chemical plants discharged toxins directly in the watersheds, turning entire rivers into chemical soups. Mining operations poison whole regions, leaving behind wastelands where nothing will grow for generations. Environmental officials looked the other way. Either they were bribed directly, or they understood perfectly well that shutting down major polluters would cost their region GDP points, tax revenue, and jobs, which meant it would cost them their careers, their party standing, maybe their freedom. Penalties for environmental violations were laughably small. A factory caught dumping might pay a fine equivalent to a few days' profit. then continue poisoning the water supply the very next week. As long as the factory kept employing workers and filling government coffers, it wasn't going to be shut down over something as seemingly minor as dumping carcinogens into aquifers that millions drink from. One Chinese environmental expert, speaking anonymously to overseas media because publicly criticizing the system in China can end careers, or worse, put it bluntly. Water pollution in China is not technically hard to fix. We have the knowledge. We have the technology. It's politically hard to fix because the polluters and the officials don't want to change the status quo. They profit from it. But what's been happening underground over the past decade is even more sinister. Some Chinese industrial companies devised a method to hide pollution from environmental inspectors entirely: high-pressure injection of toxic wastewater directly into deep aquifers. Here's how it works. Using powerful industrial pumps, they drill boreholes down through the rock, sometimes a kilometer deep, 3,280 feet, the exact depth our opening drill reached, and inject concentrated toxic waste directly into deep geological formations that should never be contaminated. By backfilling poisonous effluent into aquifers that are hundreds of meters down, they hide the evidence completely. No visible pollution on the surface, no smell that neighbors can detect, no surface contamination that inspectors can easily find during routine checks. The waste simply disappears underground, out of sight and supposedly out of mind, until people start getting sick years later and can't figure out why. A 2013 field survey conducted by researchers from the Chinese Academy of Engineering uncovered this practice and estimated something almost unbelievable. 16 billion tons of industrial wastewater were being secretly dumped underground every single year. 16 billion tons! Those deep aquifers move extremely slowly. Water down there might take centuries or even millennia to flow and filter through rock layers. Contamination injected today will poison those zones for hundreds of years, perhaps forever. When groundwater moves that slowly, there's no natural cleansing process that can fix this kind of industrial-scale poisoning. When citizens in Shidang accused factories of underground injection, linking it to cancer spikes, online outcry forced investigations. Some arrests, a few plugged wells, but thousands of injection sites likely still operate, poisoning the water table. The human cost is staggering. Cancer villages have emerged, communities where cancer rates explode far above normal. The correlation with contaminated water is undeniable. State media eventually acknowledge the phenomenon, though they rarely investigate industrial causes. Rural health systems struggle with waterborne diseases. Diarrhea remains the leading cause of death among children under 5. And then there are the visual nightmares censorship can't hide. In 2012, the Yellow River turned blood red from chemical discharge. A Wenzhou River turned crimson overnight. Locals called it the Red River. Another ran bright yellow, reeking of industrial waste. Lake Taihu became fluorescent green algae soup in 2007, cutting off drinking water to millions. And then Shanghai, March 2013. Over 12,000 dead pig carcasses floated down the Huangpu River, a main water source for 23 million people. For days, bloated pig bodies bobbed past Shanghai's skyline. Farmers had dumped diseased livestock rather than dispose of them properly. The images went global. You can't censor thousands of pig corpses. Around that time, government reports admitted 200 million rural Chinese lacked safe drinking water. 200 million. Testing found cadmium contamination in rice from Hunan and Guangdong, staple food laced with heavy metals from polluted irrigation. And here's what should terrify everyone watching. China is one of the world's largest food exporters. Garlic, apple juice, fish, processed foods. If grown with contaminated water, these toxins don't respect borders. They end up in New York, London, Tokyo. Chinese seafood has been rejected by importers due to pollutant residues traced to polluted water sources. A 2018 Tsinghua study found water, soil, and air pollution form a vicious cycle. Water pollutes crops, contaminated soil leaches into groundwater, polluted air creates toxic rain. The poisons spread everywhere, reinforcing each other endlessly. So what happens when 1.4 billion people run out of clean water? Scholars estimate supply could fall short by 25% by 2030, 5 years away. A 25% deficit means systemic collapse, abandoned cities, mass migration, agricultural failure. The North China Plain, China's breadbasket, depends on groundwater for 60% of wheat and 45% of corn. Over 7.5 million wells drain ancient aquifers irrigating farmland nearly the size of Oklahoma. NASA satellites show between 2003 and 2010, North China lost groundwater equal to twice Beijing's annual consumption every year. If the North China Plain suffers a 33% crop loss, a plausible scenario, China would need to import 20% of globally traded corn and 13% of wheat. That would send global food prices skyrocketing. Poor nations would face immediate hunger. Geopolitical tensions would explode. And it's not just agriculture. China is the factory floor of the world. Those factories run on water. A severe drought affecting hydropower could knock out hundreds of terawatt hours, equivalent to entire nations' annual generation. That leaves coal, burning massive additional amounts, accelerating climate change, worsening air quality. The South-North Water Transfer Project, Xi's signature achievement meant to solve everything, is proving insufficient. At $70 billion, it's the largest water project ever attempted, but it's not enough. The transferred water costs 6 yuan per cubic meter. Local governments still drill free groundwater, sell it cheap, pocket the difference. The Grand Canal runs below capacity while officials drain the earth dry for profit. Beijing knows. In 2021, China enacted its first national groundwater regulation. Officials admitted over 20 provinces are overpumping, some tapping ultra-deep reserves that should never be touched. When a regime that covers up disasters admits publicly to catastrophe, it's already too late. Some progress has been made. Shanghai limited withdrawals, slowing subsidence. The water transfer stabilized Beijing's levels in some districts. Tokyo offers hope, sank 15 feet but reversed it through strict pumping bans. But China has 1.4 billion people. The scale is incomprehensible. And unlike Tokyo, China's groundwater isn't just depleted, it's poisoned. You can pump water back into aquifers, but you cannot unpollute deep groundwater contaminated with industrial toxins. That's a generational problem, maybe civilizational. Xi Jinping can't hide this anymore. For all the party's control, they can't censor reality, can't stop rivers from dying, can't prevent ground from sinking, can't make poison wells safe by deleting posts. Nature rebels against the cover-up. When fish leap from polluted ponds choosing death, no propaganda explains it. When cameras capture blood-red rivers faster than sensors delete them, truth gets out. Truth bubbles from 3,280 feet down carried in toxic groundwater that can't sustain 1.4 billion people. The drill exposed more than geology. It exposed the lie at China's heart. That growth can't continue forever. That resources are infinite. That party control extends over nature. It doesn't. Water is the source of life. If poisoned or dried up, civilizations cannot survive. For thousands of years, Chinese dynasties rose and fell with rivers. The Yellow River gave birth to Chinese civilization. When rivers failed, dynasties collapsed. Xi and the party knows this. It's why they've thrown billions at water projects, declared wars on pollution, passed regulations. But they're learning what every dynasty learned. You cannot defy hydrology through political will. The aquifers took tens of thousands of years to fill. China drained them in decades. No technology can fix this on the timeline they need. What happens next will reshape the century. If China cannot secure water, we'll witness the largest migration in human history. Agricultural collapse, supply chains breaking down. Food price spikes destabilizing governments, commodity shortages, geopolitical instability on unprecedented scales. The drill that went 3,280 feet down didn't just find a water crisis, it found the future. Seeping through cracks in sinking cities, flowing from contaminated taps, absent from dried riverbeds that once sustained empires. Xi Jinping cannot bury this secret. The earth exposes the truth. One drained aquifer, one sinking city, one poison well. Water is life. China is running out of both. No propaganda can change that. So what do you think? Can China engineer its way out, or are we watching the collapse of a civilization built on borrowed water? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to stay ahead of the geopolitical stories shaping our world, subscribe to Fall of Nations.